For years, I followed every so-called healthy eating rule that the experts were telling us. I cut back on red meat. I limited my fat. I ate Special K for breakfast. I swapped butter for margarine. I limited my salt. And let me tell you, I felt horrible. And I looked horrible too. My energy was crashing. I always had cravings. My hormones were all over the place. I had trouble focusing and my workouts felt flat. So eventually I decided this wasn't for me. I was gonna stop following the rules. I was going to try some things out and figure out what actually worked for my body. And let me tell you, this completely changed how I felt, how I looked, and how my body functioned. So today I wanted to talk a bit about what I do, because the way I eat, the life I live, I don't follow a strict diet. I don't have strict rules. It's more of a framework. Every decision I make throughout the day when it comes to food and movement and all of that, I try to stay within this framework. Now, the key is that with this, you don't have to be perfect. It's a spectrum. You can always make better choices and you can always make worse choices. And as long as you try to make the best choices you can as often as you can, you're going to be successful. Because when you try to be perfect, when you try to follow some rigid way of eating, I know for myself personally, this stresses me out to no end. I end up worrying about every little thing. I can't eat out. I stress about how much sugar is in the sauce, what oil they're cooking with. And don't get me wrong, all of those things, not good. But what matters is what you do the majority of the time and not the minority. If you can't even eat out, if you can't even enjoy a friend's birthday party because you're so worried about what you're eating, that's not healthy either. Chronic stress, not a good thing. And at the end of the day, why are we trying to be healthy? We're trying to be healthy in order to enjoy our life. And if we're not doing that, then what are we doing? But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Welcome back to the Healthy Not Complicated podcast. If you're new here, my name's Kait. I'm a nutritionist and I specialize in blood sugar balance, hormone balance, and insulin resistance. And this episode, it might challenge a few things you believe about nutrition. If this is your first time stopping by the channel and you are used to hearing that eggs are bad, that they're high in cholesterol, that they should be limited, then this is definitely going to be a bit eye-opening for you. But even if you have been in the low carb space online for a while and you know that eggs aren't bad, this video might surprise you, but in a different way. Now, a lot of the recommendations that we have traditionally been told were meant to make us healthier, but a big part of the problem is nutrition is hard to study. It's basically impossible to determine anything definitively because when you do a study, you can't do it for a long period of time and you can't control all the variables. Because if you were going to do this, you would have to lock people up for a long period of time, control every single thing they're eating, and we just can't do that. So nutrition studies, they're either done on large populations where there can be so many variables that we can't account for. They rely on food frequency questionnaires where people are sent a questionnaire in the mail, they fill it out. How many times a week did you eat red meat? How many times a week did you eat eggs? Et cetera, et cetera. And that can only be so accurate. So big picture, that can point us towards trends in nutrition. That can point us towards foods that are healthy or unhealthy. But from there, more rigorous research needs to be done. And like I said, you can't really do these studies for a long period of time because there's no way. Who is going to volunteer to eat the same foods and stick to it consistently for years at a time? No one. And you can't force people to do this. It's not ethical. So therefore, that's the reason you will see one news article saying there's a study that eggs are bad and another saying that eggs are good. These studies are done for short periods of time. And like I said, there are so many other variables. So this is why a lot of things that we've been told have been unhealthy turned out to not be the problem. I've used eggs a few times as an example, but that's a really good one. We used to be told that dietary cholesterol would raise our blood cholesterol, and this isn't the case. Our bodies are more complex than that. And also, this is a whole discussion, but cholesterol itself isn't bad. You might know that there are different types of cholesterol. LDL is usually considered to be the bad cholesterol, and HDL is generally considered to be the good cholesterol. Again, there's more nuance to that. LDL itself isn't bad. Yes, high LDL can be an indicator that something else is going on in your body, but it also can mean nothing. You can be entirely healthy and have high LDL. There are other biomarkers that are better indicators of our health, of our heart disease risk. But back to dietary cholesterol. We were told for years to limit cholesterol, to eat less eggs, that sort of thing. And then the science caught up and we realized that dietary cholesterol doesn't raise our blood cholesterol. Now, in most countries, cholesterol, there never was an upper recommended limit on it. In some countries, they did add it in. The United States is one of them. And in 2015, they actually removed cholesterol as a nutrient of concern and they got rid of the upper limit. That was 10 years ago. And still, it is so ingrained in people's heads that cholesterol is bad, that if they have high cholesterol, they need to be careful about how many eggs they're eating. And even the dietary guidelines don't say this anymore. So let's start off by breaking down some of the biggest dietary myths. Some ones you've probably heard. Fat is bad, animal protein's bad, you should be eating mainly plants, you should be eating the rainbow. Salt is bad, eating frequently speeds up your metabolism. Yep, we're going to debunk these all. The truth is that most people nowadays, in Western countries at least, we follow all of these guidelines. We follow all of these rules and we've been following them. There are so many low-fat products out there. There are so many plant-based alternatives to meat. The snacking industry, absolutely huge. People eat all day long. And yet we have record rates of obesity, diabetes, PCOS, chronic fatigue. People are following these rules and we are sicker than ever. So what's the catch? What is going on here? Well, let's start with the low fat myth. Fat was demonized back in the 80s and the 90s. It led to this huge low fat craze. Now, I do think the pendulum is kind of swinging the other way. A lot of people are realizing that fat isn't the enemy. Even if it's just certain types of fat, even if it's just things like avocado and coconut oil, olive oil. There used to be a fear of fat, full stop. So even this is some progress. But here's the problem. When you take fat out of food, you need to replace it with something else. And what do most companies replace it with? Sugar. Those healthy yogurts, those low-fat granola bars, they're actually higher in carbs and sugar than they would otherwise be. They're basically dessert disguised as breakfast. Not to mention they're ultra processed. Now, when you eat fat and a decent amount of protein in your diet, you don't really need to worry too much about carbs, at least if you're going into this as someone who is already metabolically healthy, because protein, fat, and also fiber, they slow down the digestion of carbohydrates. So carbs aren't broken down as rapidly. And when they're not broken down as rapidly, they don't enter the bloodstream as rapidly, and blood sugar doesn't spike as sharply. It's more gradual. A less gradual spike in blood sugar means a less gradual release of insulin, and this is a good thing. High insulin leads to a lot of chronic diseases, including prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, heart disease. There is a long list. So if you can keep your cells insulin sensitive and you do this by reducing the amount of insulin your body's releasing, then you are reducing your disease risk across the board. But when you eat foods that are low in protein and fat and that are high in carbs and sugar, they're broken down rapidly. And that's when your blood sugar spikes, and that's when a lot of insulin is needed, and there's just more insulin than what is optimal. Not to mention, when your blood sugar spikes like this, the sharper it spikes, the harder it crashes. And sometimes when all this insulin is released, the body overcompensates. That insulin takes too much sugar out of your bloodstream, and that's when your blood sugar drops too low. That's when you get shaky, that's when you get hangry, that's when you get headaches. And what do you do when you're in these situations? You want a snack, you want something sugary. Your body is craving it because your blood sugar has dropped too low. And if we reach for these low protein and fat snack options, then we're just repeating the cycle. Blood sugar is going to spike again and it's going to crash again. And this is why so many people have issues with energy throughout the day. This is why so many people are reliant on caffeine. Now, caffeine, it's not bad. It does have benefits, but we shouldn't be relying on it. So cutting fat out of your diet, that was one change I can remember consciously thinking about, especially in high school. I have spoken about this in other videos where I've talked about, I guess, my story. I haven't talked about it for a while though, but As I went through high school, I was always very athletic. I played a lot of sports growing up. But going through high school, I started gaining weight. And yeah, I was eating a lot of like junk food in retrospect. But I was also trying, and I was also conscious of what was considered to be healthy. I would eat Special K for breakfast. I would always choose whole grain. I would always choose low-fat yogurt. And this wasn't helping. This was leaving me hungrier. And this was probably one of the first actual changes that I made to my diet that I noticed a big difference in my life, in how I felt, in my health, was when I first learned about low carb and I first learned about keto and I started increasing my fat intake. I just felt better overall. My energy was more sustainable. I didn't have these big crashes. I felt satisfied after my meals. And I used to have an absolutely raging sweet tooth that couldn't be tamed. But when I started reducing sugar and increasing fat, this definitely mellowed out. Don't get me wrong, I do still love a sweet treat every now and then, but I don't have to battle with my sweet tooth all day long. Every day. Now let's talk about the plant-based craze. So this was definitely something that I fell victim to. I talked about how I first went low carb and keto and reduced carbs, increased my fat, stopped fearing fat. But at the beginning of this, there was a little bit of a murky stage where I was torn between eating low carb and eating a more plant-based diet. Because this was way back in like 2016, 2017, maybe even a little bit earlier. At the time, I was doing a lot of long distance cycling, and there were sort of two competing ideas, if you will, when it came to how to eat for endurance sports and cycling specifically. And there was one side that was very much vegan, plant-based, low fat, high carbs. And then the other side was low carb, using ketones for energy. And I can remember trying the high carb version. I started watching all those documentaries promoting a vegan or a plant-based diet that were completely demonizing meat. And I was falling for the propaganda. Now, I didn't eat this way for too long, but I definitely was eating plant-based and high carb for a period of time. And let me tell you, when it came to my cycling, I was suffering because your body can only store a limited amount of carbohydrates. You can get maybe a couple hours of exercise in before all of your stored carbs are depleted. And this was the problem I was falling into. I was going on like a long bike ride and I was having to stop to eat every hour and a half, every 2 hours. If I didn't stop to eat, my energy absolutely tanked. They call it bonking. And let me tell you, it is a terrible feeling. So I was getting a bit frustrated because I was eating this way that I was seeing a lot of people online talking about. A lot of people who were doing a lot of cycling were eating this way, eating a lot of fruit. And I was like, this is very annoying. I'm trying to go on a bike ride and I'm having to constantly be eating. That's when I sort of shifted over to try a more low carb style where you could tap into your stored body fat for energy. And oh my God, that made a huge difference for me. I could actually go on like a ride that was 3-4 hours long, only eating something small before or not even eating anything before. I wouldn't have to stop to eat and I felt really, really good. Now that was a bit of a tangent, but all of that is to say that when I did eat low carb, I realized that I really needed to increase my protein because I look back at photos of myself during this time. I lost so much muscle mass trying to eat this low fat vegan way of eating and not getting any quality protein in because animal protein really is superior to plant protein. Animal protein, for starters, is a complete protein source. This means any meat, seafood, eggs, animal products you eat has all of the essential amino acids you need. Those are types of protein and in the correct amounts. Plant protein isn't balanced like this. It's incomplete. Beans, legumes, they have varying amounts of these amino acids and they don't contain all of the ones you need. So in theory, you can pair together different plant protein sources and get enough of all the essential amino acids. but I'm not convinced that actually works. Not to mention, when you limit animal protein in your diet, you're missing out on things such as vitamin B12, which is absolutely critical for our health. You're missing out on heme iron, which is more easily absorbed by the body than the type of iron that's found in plants, beans, legumes, that sort of thing, spinach. You're missing out on iodine unless you're eating a lot of seafood. You're missing out on zinc. And all of these are especially important for women. How many women do you know who have issues with their energy, who have thyroid issues? These stem from being low in iron, being low in iodine. And this is largely because collectively, we aren't eating enough of these foods. We've been told to limit them. I used to have issues with my cycle and with my period. And I think that increasing my red meat and increasing my iodine in my diet made a massive difference. I used to have debilitating cramps. And when I started getting in enough iron through my diet, not through a supplement, and enough iodine, same thing, I felt so much better during my period. My cycle was more regular, and yeah, my periods weren't as heavy. So that was massive. And that is something that I still can't even fathom I went through. I can remember being in high school and I would have to miss a day of school every month because I would feel absolutely sick for at least one day during my period. And it was so heavy that I couldn't even sit through one whole class. And it's not like that anymore, but it was like that for so many years, which is absolutely crazy. Now, hopefully I haven't scared off too many men with this period talk, but don't worry. I still think there is a lot for everyone to get out of this episode, not just women. Now, another trap that I fell into and that I followed for so many years was eating small, frequent meals throughout the day. There is this huge myth that I think a lot of people still think of daily, that is, you need to be eating constantly or else your metabolism slows down. Now, I can see where this stems from because if you are a chronic dieter, if you restrict your calories significantly for a long period of time, then yeah, your metabolism does slow down because your body realizes we're not getting enough energy in on a consistent basis to meet all of the demands that we need. So we're going to cut back on things. And it cuts back on processes that aren't essential. Obviously, it wants to keep your heart beating. It wants to keep your lungs working. But things like your hair, your nails, those aren't critical for survival. So that's why chronic dieters will have hair loss, why they'll have brittle nails, why they'll be constantly tired, why they get headaches. This is because the metabolism is slowing down. So I think that that is where this idea that we need to be eating small, frequent meals came from. But the problem is when you eat this way, you are constantly spiking your blood sugar, as we already spoke about, especially if you're eating especially if you're eating low-fat foods that are high in carbs and high in sugar, especially if you're not getting enough protein. I think you can kind of see how all of these things come together to create the perfect storm. And that's kind of why our health as a society is where it currently is. When you eat every 2 to 3 hours, your blood sugar is going up, your insulin's going up. But before your insulin has a chance to come back down, you eat again. So more insulin is needed. And that leaves you in a place where your insulin is elevated all day long. And that's a bad place to be because when your insulin is high like this, when your cells are already filled with all the glucose, all of the stored carbohydrates that they can be filled with, and then you eat again, the insulin takes that energy and tries to put it in your cells, and your cells are like, no, like we don't need this. We're already full. And then what ends up happening is your cells start resisting insulin, and that's insulin resistance. So this is why so many of us are either on track to develop prediabetes and type 2 diabetes or have been diagnosed with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes because we're eating low fat, we're eating high carb, we're eating frequently, we're not getting enough protein in, we're not getting these essential nutrients in, which also play a role in blood sugar control, in our metabolism. And yeah, over time, our cells become less sensitive to insulin, they become more insulin resistant, and blood sugar creeps up. And we wonder why weight loss is so hard. We have created an environment where our bodies don't know how to burn fat anymore. They are so used to relying on glucose and carbs. They're so used to us eating frequently and this energy always coming in. That's why so many of us struggle to lose weight. And now I want to talk about the reduce salt myth. This idea that eating too much salt in our diets causes high blood pressure, causes hypertension, and can increase our heart disease risk. This isn't true. There is so much nuance here because sodium is actually an essential electrolyte. We need it for our nerves, for our muscles, for our brain to function. Without it, we get headaches, we get tired, we get muscle cramps. If you're eating a lot of processed food, you probably don't have to worry about eating more sodium because it is absolutely packed in these foods, especially if the foods are low fat. That means that they're not going to taste as good. So usually what's added is salt and sugar. That's why most people who are just eating processed food don't need to worry about increasing their salt intake. And that's why they can see their blood pressure come down and their health improve when they start reducing sodium in their diet. It's not because they reduce the sodium, but rather because they've reduced processed food. Now, when people first start switching to eating a more whole food diet, when they reduce processed food, maybe they're a bit smarter about their carbs, maybe they reduce carbs, maybe they're intermittent fasting, then they see a drastic decrease in how much sodium they're consuming. And actually so much so that they need to be adding more salt and sodium into their diet because they aren't getting enough. That's why a lot of people, when they first go keto, they experience the keto flu. Most of the time, it's not that your body is switching over into ketosis. It's actually that your electrolytes are low because you're also retaining less water when you eat fewer carbs. And that means that you're retaining fewer electrolytes as well. So you need even more. So you've cut out processed food. That's cutting down on your sodium intake. You are eating fewer carbs. That means you need more sodium. And then things like caffeine and exercise, these also increase your need for sodium. And here's the thing, too much sodium actually doesn't raise your blood pressure. Well, it does, but only in the moment. This is the same as with exercise. Exercise doesn't raise your blood pressure chronically over time. It's not the cause of hypertension, but when you are exercising, yeah, your blood pressure does go up. This is the same with salt. When you consume salt, there might be a temporary increase in your blood pressure, but that doesn't mean it's increasing it chronically over time. And this was one thing I really noticed when I was doing endurance cycling and when I got back into hockey was how important electrolytes are, and sodium especially. I realized that when I was drinking plain water, I was actually throwing off the ratio between water and electrolytes and actually dehydrating myself further because your body wants to have this balance of water to electrolytes. That's when you're going to function optimally. And if you drink too much plain water and you don't have enough electrolytes, then you're going to be peeing more because your body is trying to level out this ratio. So that was a huge, eye-opening thing for me to realize was how much better I felt when I started adding salt or an electrolyte supplement to my water when I was cycling, when I was playing hockey. Hockey especially, I used to get so many muscle cramps towards the end of the game. I would be fighting for my life for my calves not to cramp up. And this was actually because I was losing a lot of sodium, sweating during the game and not replenishing it. So that was huge. And on that note, let's have a quick break to thank today's sponsor, Sodi. If you've ever felt lighthearted during a workout, or if you're drinking tons of water but still feel tired, it might not be dehydration. It might be low electrolytes, especially sodium. Sodi is my go-to hydration salt because it's designed specifically for people who eat whole foods or follow low-carb diets, meaning we naturally need more sodium than the standard low-salt recommendations suggest. I use Sodi every morning, especially before training or filming days. It helps me stay energized, focused, and hydrated, without that bloated feeling some electrolyte drinks cause. Plus, it tastes amazing, and it's free of sugar and artificial ingredients. You can try Sodi today at healthcoachkate.com/Sodi electrolytes. I'll put that on the screen now and in the description box down below. And use my code HCK15 for 15% off your first order. That's HCK15 at healthcoachkate.com/Sodi electrolytes. All right, now let's get back to the episode. So what did I do when I finally realized that all these rules were working against me? Well, first off, I started prioritizing protein, and especially animal protein. That was the biggest shift. Like I said, when I started getting enough iron and iodine in through my diet, I felt so much better throughout the month. I didn't have an automatic few days that were a write-off. And this also helped with my snacking and my cravings because protein is so important for satiety. When you eat enough protein, you're more satisfied after your meals and you don't have that urge to snack in between. And that helps when you're trying to break that cycle of eating these small, frequent meals. That's probably one of my biggest tips, and I talk about it all the time. If you're feeling hungry in between meals, if you are constantly reaching for a snack, if you have cravings, up your protein intake at your meals. The next thing I did was I stopped fearing fat and all types of fat. Saturated fat isn't bad. It's natural. The types of fat we should be fearing are the processed ones. And you might know that I'm referring to vegetable oils. Now, vegetable oil is a broad term for things like soybean, corn oil, canola oil. And these are oils, most of them, they don't actually even come from vegetables. Now, if you think of something like corn, there isn't a lot of fat in corn. If you compare it to something like an olive, you can squeeze an olive and the oil comes out. This is pretty easy to extract. With corn, you can't squeeze a corn kernel and get the oil to come out, at least not by hand. At least not without heavy machinery. And that's why vegetable oils are so highly processed, because it takes a lot to get them out of their plant. And the type of oils that vegetable oils are, it's mainly polyunsaturated. Now, what that means is that, well, there are three types of fat. There's saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated. Saturated fat is the most stable. You can heat it to high temperatures and it doesn't oxidize. It doesn't go rancid. Now, monounsaturated fat, somewhere in the middle, that's from things like olives, avocado oil. It is less resistant to heat. You can't heat it as much or else it'll go rancid, but it is more stable than polyunsaturated. Polyunsaturated, any type of heat basically breaks it down. It oxidizes, and when we consume oxidized oils, they cause inflammation in the body. This isn't the type of fat that our bodies need or need a lot of. Now, we do need a small amount of polyunsaturated fat, and we need that in the form of mainly omega-3. So we're not even getting it from these vegetable oils. We get omega-3s from things like fatty fish. All of that is to say, I stopped fearing fat as a whole, and also specifically saturated fat, which is, like I said, the best type for cooking. Things like ghee, coconut oil, tallow, these are fantastic. They aren't bad. They don't clog your arteries. Again, this is another myth that has been debunked. It's these artificial, man-made, basically, vegetable oils that you want to avoid. And the final main change I made that really improved my health was I started focusing on getting more electrolytes, and specifically sodium. Especially being an athlete, this is so important. But like I said, if you eat low carb, if you eat mainly whole foods, if you don't eat a lot of processed foods, then getting enough electrolytes and sodium in specifically is so important. If you are feeling a little bit stuck and like you're not feeling your best eating whole foods and you can't really figure out why, this is definitely where I would recommend checking in with first, especially if you don't salt your food a lot, if you drink a lot of plain water. Definitely think about this one. And the final change I made was I stopped buying foods that were labeled as healthy. Now there is, I guess, a bit of a gray area here. There are some processed foods that are still made of whole foods and that are healthy. Again, there's a spectrum. There's always going to be better and worse choices you can make. So let's talk about something like protein powder. Protein powder, no matter what, it's processed. But there are protein powders that have a whole bunch of artificial sweeteners, that have sugar, that have carbs added, that have just weird ingredients, long ingredients lists. So those would be the ones that I would recommend avoiding. But then on the other end of the spectrum, there are protein powders that have 1 or 2 ingredients. They're just whey protein, maybe some cocoa powder for flavor, maybe a natural sweetener like stevia. So if your choice is not getting enough protein in your diet, getting a protein powder with minimal ingredients, or getting a protein powder with a lot of ingredients, then yeah, you're better off going with the protein powder with minimal ingredients than not getting enough protein at all. So in general, I really try to eat mainly whole foods. That is always going to be my go-to. And when I spoke about my framework at the start of this video, this is really the basis of it. As often as I can, if I can make the choice to eat whole foods over anything processed, that's what I'm gonna do. So an example of this is if I'm eating out at a restaurant and I'm looking at the menu, I'm gonna try to choose something that is most likely some sort of meat and some sort of vegetable. Because even if these have sauces that have sugar in them, even if they're cooked in oils that aren't ideal, this is gonna be better than choosing something that's processed off the menu. The same goes if I'm out and I really need something to eat. If I am looking for just a little snack, like I said, I don't really recommend snacking, but I do understand that there is a time and a place when you're hungry and you need something. So when I'm reaching for a snack, I'm always gonna try to get something that's whole foods, as opposed to something that's labeled healthy and processed. So instead of any of those bars, Quest bars, whatever else they have nowadays, I'm gonna try to choose something like a beef jerky stick with minimal ingredients, like some macadamia nuts. Those would be my choice. And again, this fits in my framework. These aren't hard rules. And this is what I wish a lot of people knew. Eating healthy doesn't mean eating low calories. It doesn't mean eating plant-based. It doesn't mean avoiding meat. It doesn't mean avoiding salt. There are so many misconceptions out there. And what I think a lot of us need to start practicing is listening to our bodies. We can be eating healthy, in quotes, and following all these rules and know deep down that we don't feel great, but we continue following these rules, and for what? If anything you're doing isn't working for you, then change it. You know yourself best. You are the one who knows how you feel. So if it's not working, make a change. If you're eating low fat and you don't feel great, if you are currently eating a vegan diet and you feel low energy, if your cycle is out of whack, if you are getting headaches all the time, make a change. It starts with you. So to sum it up, anytime I stopped following these healthy eating rules, my health actually got a little bit better. I started eating more protein and animal protein specifically, more fat, I upped my salt, and my body started trusting me again. My blood sugar stabilized, my hormones balanced, I started rebuilding the muscle mass that I lost. And here's the best part, it wasn't complicated. And that's truly what I believe. Health shouldn't be complicated. Now, if this video resonated with you, I would love for you to leave me a comment down below. If you're watching on Spotify or listening on Spotify, there is a comment section there. I do get a few comments here and there. If you're watching on YouTube, comment down below. Let me know what stuck from this video. Was there anything that was new to you, or had you heard all of this before? I love chatting with you. And right now I'm gonna link on the screen other episodes of Healthy Not Complicated for you to check out. Thanks guys for tuning in, and remember, getting healthy doesn't have to be complicated.